Does your shop lack a lot of clutterness and not shop organization? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how I make this minimalist, I guess I would call it a minimalist, hand tool wall. It's pretty simple. I left a little bit of room up top, so if I ever did want to grow my collection, I wouldn't have to make a new board. I could just keep this one. So go ahead and get subscribed to my channel, because I do have a couple videos already on shop organization, and I do have more planned for the future. So stay tuned and let me know what you think in the comments. What I was doing is just taking out all the tools from the areas that I did grab them across the shop, because it really didn't have a home for them, and this is the reason why I'm building them in the first place. So I'm just going over everything, make sure all the tools are what I want to use in this cabinet. And now just to go through all my wood storage. Obviously I have a lot. Even had to jump up on top of the planer, which was probably not the best idea, but hey, it worked. I wanted this piece of cherry that's been sitting up there for about 6 months, so it was nice and brown and it looked really pretty. And this is pretty much what I ended up with. Piece of maple, some walnut, a couple walnut dowels, some red oak, all that good stuff that was sitting there. Really didn't have a use for it, so glad I'm using it up right now. So now I'm just trying to lay out everything, see how I want it to look. I honestly do not have an idea of what I'm gonna do, so I'm just kind of throwing it around, seeing how I like everything. So what I did after I laid everything out is I cut it about 6 to 8 inches longer, just so if I ever did grow my hand tool collection, I'd have enough room so I didn't have to make another board. I don't think I'm going to grow that much more on hand tools, because like I said, I really hardly ever use them. Now I'm just using my track saw, breaking down the piece. Of course, you can do it different ways, but I have a track saw, so of course I'm going to use it. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting off with the block plane and the rabbiting plane. I wanted to build the pieces for this first, because I really like the block plane and I like the rabbiting plane. I think there's some really cool looking planes. So I wanted to make sure that those were like the show pieces and I could build the tools off of those two. So I had to fill in some cracks, some checks, a couple knots in this walnut. Some really cool looking stuff. It had some pretty cool figure to it, so I made sure that I used it for these two pieces. And not only is that Starbond good for filling in checks and cracks, it's also really good for putting like small finicky pieces together like this, because trying to wait for glue to dry, just regular Titebond, would be impossible just to try to get these to hold together until you can get some brad nails through the back or some screws, which I'm going to use screws. It was just a big pain in the butt to use that, so I like to use the Starbond stuff for these. Now I'm putting the little holder together for the little rabbiting plane. I wanted to keep the same style as I did as the block plane. I didn't want to change it up too much. So I even searched online for this, and there wasn't really any cool ideas for hanging a hammer up, so I just kind of came up with an idea just to drill a couple dowels into each side and just hold this on. And if you didn't catch that in the last scene, what that little piece of tape on the end of the drill bit does is it makes sure that you don't go all the way through. I use this method whenever I'm doing breadboards as well, so I don't drill through. And yes, before I get flamed from the 35-year-old dude still living in his mom's basement, yes, I do have a lot of woodpecker's tools, and no, I don't want to put my woodpecker stuff on this. I already have a spot for that. So I'm just using this square that was my very first square that I had before I got all the woodpecker stuff, and I wanted to keep it with this tools because it means a lot to me, because it was my first square. So I have the water stone and the diamond stone. I wanted to add them together. I only have the two, so I don't really need to keep them separated. Those are all really the grits that I do need, because I don't go super sharp with my tools anyways. So what I'm doing here is just adding screws, and then I'm plugging it with dowels. As you can see in my other couple videos, I have the same flow going all across the shop by using maple and then using these walnut dowels. I think, of course, walnut and maple are like the best contrasting colors that go together the best. So I wanted to incorporate that back into these two. After hitting those walnut dowels home, I go ahead and grab the flush trim saw, cut them down. I try to keep the saw as flat as I can so it doesn't add too many divots into the maple. It just makes it easier to sand, which I hate sanding. So now it's the same process, just like I did with the hand plane and the little rabbiting plane. I had a little bit of glue on the back just for long-term holding, and then I had some of that CA glue and some of that accelerator just to speed up the process. This was one of those other weird ones that I couldn't figure out any cool ideas with, just like the hammer. I seen some ones online that people were putting the blades out, and so if you would ever walk by it, you would cut yourself because these little saws are super sharp. And I didn't want that, and I wanted it to lay flat. I thought it looked cooler too, so just drilled a hole into the handle, which was no big deal, and then I just added a little dowel. And the last tool I wanted to put on this before I did add any more hand tools in the future is I wanted to add this little Veritas honing guide. There wasn't really any cool kind of ideas that I could think of it either, because usually people don't put them up on a wall like this, they just set them on a shelf. So what I did is this, added two little dowels, put them at a slight angle up so that if you bumped into it, it wouldn't slip off the wall. So originally I didn't plan on adding any kind of border, but after I got to looking at it, I'm like, man, this looks terrible, because you can see the plywood edges, and this is not very nice plywood either, so you know, it's like a 5 or 6 ply, it's not anything real nice. So I wanted to add a border on it, and I had some of that cherry, and I had a lot of that cherry left, so I decided to add a little border of it. But I also wanted to not make the edges flush, I wanted to give it that craftsman style, not just at the top, but I also did it at the bottom as well. So I usually wouldn't use any kind of brad nail on the sides because you can usually see them, but for one, this is shop furniture, so it's not the biggest deal. But I couldn't figure out any way to actually put the border onto this since I didn't really plan it out very well. So what I did is I just shot it on with 23 gauge pin nails, and then it wasn't pulling super tight because the pin nails are not really there to do anything, they're just there to hold it until the glue dries. So I put some clamps onto it just to pull it nice and tight. And to keep the theme with what I got going on, you can actually see that router cabinet that I have in the back right there. I also added like walnut dowels into the cherry, and I mean, it's just a really nice, cool little touch that I like. Really didn't need it because there was plenty of glue there, but like I said, I wanted it to be somewhat kind of cool looking. And if you're wondering why I didn't add those block plane and that rabbiting plane on there first, is because, like I said, I wanted those tools to go on first just to get everything laid out, and then I didn't want to attach them yet either because I wasn't sure if I was going to like the placement once I got the other tools on there. And it also helped with sanding because I was able to take pretty much all the tools off there, get everything nice and sanded, and there was no tools in the way. So like I mentioned before, I wanted to come back and add the screws. I like to add the screws into it because the star bond and the glue will eventually break bond, and these screws will just help keep it nice and tight for years to come. And you can see I added 2 screws to each part of it. I think 2 screws will help hold it nice and tight for years to come. So what I did next is I added 3 coats of water-based polyurethane. Yes, I could have used oil-based polyurethane. It probably would have made the walnut and the maple pop better, but for one, I hate using the oil-based because it stinks, and for two, it's harder to clean up, and so I just opted for water-based, and I think I'll be happy with the results. So one pro to me building this shop is that if you don't follow me on Instagram, you should. But I actually did build this little 16 by 16 shop out of my backyard. I built it by myself. I wanted to prove to myself that I could build it. So I do know that I paid attention to making sure all my studs were on 16 on center, which makes it really nice for hanging anything, because if it's like my house inside, the studs are at either 12 inches or they're at 15 or 18 on center. It's just a big pain in the butt. So here's all the tools going up on the wall. I really like the way that this came out, and I'm really happy with it. And if you guys enjoyed what you guys are seeing, I would appreciate a good like, comment, and subscribe, and it helps my channel out so much, and I will see you guys on the next video. Thank you.